Hi and welcome, my dear friend of the underwater world. I recently came across an interesting topic that I would like to share with you today, namely a cold water compatible configuration of your regulator. We will see in this video why this topic is interesting and that there is still a considerable need for discussion, so stay tuned. But first, let's take a look at the physics behind it. And stop. Do not turn off the video just because the word physics was mentioned. I promise I'll keep it as short as possible and you'll soon see why I can't do without it. Have you ever inflated your bike with a simple hand pump? I'm sure you have. And depending on how you held it, you might have literally burned your fingers. Why does this happen? Here, when you inflate your tire, its volume remains largely the same, but more and more air molecules are added so that the available space becomes less and less. As a result, the air molecules collide more and more frequently as the available space decreases. This creates friction, which in turn leads to heat generation, and you burn your fingers. Incidentally, the same effect occurs when you fill your scuba tank. Simply touch it directly after filling. You won't burn your fingers, but you will feel the heat. This occurs very strongly in the valve, for example the bottleneck. By the way, we also covered the general topic in my video gases under pressure, which I'll link to again in the video description below. So take a look at it if you don't see it in the past. Why do we need this now when we go diving? Quite simply. This effect also works in the opposite direction. This is known as the Joule-Thomson effect, and the result is that a gas that expands cools down. Where does this happen? With each breath, the gas comes from your cylinder, is reduced to medium pressure and then reduced again from this medium pressure to the ambient pressure so that you can breathe well. The biggest difference occurs in your first stage, as the medium pressure is slightly higher than the ambient pressure. To give you a rough temperature, when using air as a breathing gas, temperatures of up to minus 40 degrees Celsius can occur during dives in our local waters. The consequence of this, your regulator icing up, blowing off, and thus creating a situation that is highly life-threatening. There are various configurations to deal with precisely this situation. But before I go into these, a little information first. This video is based exclusively on the equipment-related perspective. Also, various associations naturally also look at other aspects such as the diving partner, planning and preparation. These are all very important points but would go beyond the scope of this video. To create a uniform basis of understanding for this video, as we usually dive with 2 second stages, I will refer to them as follows. The first stage regulator or main regulator refers to your primary first stage from which you breathe using the second stage. Second regulator or secondary regulators refers to the first stage to which your octopus, for example your alternative second stage, is connected. This regulator is usually made available to your dive buddy in the event of a problem. I will not go into the different hose lengths because this topic is worth for a separate video. The same applies to side mount configuration with 2 tanks where you continuously switch between the 2 cylinders or 2 tanks. And there is still no universal valid standardization on this topic that has been unified across associations. So please be polite and respectful in your comments because there is only a global right or wrong here at association level. Yeah, so and now, but let's go to the real problem. We want to minimize the risk of icing caused by the Joule-Thomson effect as far as possible, and in an absolute emergency, the configuration learned in many basic courses like the open water diver with everything connected to the first stage would tend to favor icing due to the high airflow and the resulting top of pressure. Let's briefly list what comes together here in an emergency. The diver's primary second stage without a problem, his alternative second stage that he hands to the body, and the diver's BCD, which may also be used for your buoyancy. And let's not forget that in a stressful situation like this, the breathing rate increases and therefore a stronger airflow prevails due to the increased breathing rate. So how do we best arrange all this when using two first stages? In terms of self-rescue, it should be clear that we mount the two second stages on two different regulators. Know that in emergency we can close the cylinder valve of the blow-off regulator and switch to the second stage of the second regulator. Depending on the clarity, I will display a finimeter as shown here or omit it if it detracts from the clarity. Of course, a transmitter can also be used instead of the finimeter at any time, although it should be noted that electronic signals are more susceptible to interference than the mechanics of a finimeter. In case of doubt, it is best to use both. We are looking at the configuration of the VDST and the DIR configuration of GUE, the Global Underwater Explorers. The VDST is a German scuba diving association. Thanks at this point to Frank Ostheimer from the VDST, who not only gave me permission to use the VDST's equipment recommendation as a reference source, but also provide me with a specialist article from 2021 that deals with exactly this topic which we discussed here, and also provided some impulses and more ideas. All configurations recommended by the VDST are based on the assumption that the second regulator is the most important means of self-rescue and rescue other ones. At the same time, when considering the Joule-Thomson effect, we learned that the danger of icing is caused by gas expansion and that your first regulator will therefore be primarily affected. The reason for this is that you will be breathing continuously from this regulator and therefore a constant flow of air will cause constant cooling. We have also learned that the cooling load adds up when the regulator and BCDs are used together. So the first configuration is for a wetsuit and a BCD or a jacket, where your first regulator is only intended for your breathing gas supply. The second regulator includes the alternative second stage with an inflator connection. The advantage of this is that the refrigeration load during the dive is continuously distributed over two stages by this arrangement, and in the event of an icing, if the cylinder outlet of your primary regulator is closed, the buoyancy can still be adjusted by the inflator on the second regulator. The second configuration of the VDST is now for the use of a tri-suit that is filled with its own filling gas. For example, argon from its own tank. The configuration of your first and second regulator remains as described in the previous configuration. And also here the advantages mentioned before stay the same. In addition, the use of a separate filling gas cylinder means that you do not have to change the configuration if you are regularly switching between wet and dry suits. For the third VDST configuration, we will continue to use a dry suit, but will dispense with a separate cylinder of filling gas. As the dry suit is now also supplied from the breathing gas tank, the question arises as to which regulator to connect it to. The solution is to connect the tri-suit to the second regulator as well, as the tri-suit also serves as a buoyancy compensator. All the advantages of the previous examples are retained with this configuration. The cold load from breathing and buoyancy control is divided between two first stages, and the buoyancy compensator, or the BCD, or the jacket, and also the tri-suit can still be inflated if the first stage is closed in the event of an icing. However, it should be noted that the second regulator must have 3 medium pressure outlets or more. For the fourth configuration of the VDST, we remain in the same use, a tri-suit that is filled with breathing gas, with the difference that the tri-suit is now filled or inflated from your primary regulator. As the tri-suit should be inflated in short bursts, this arrangement is not critical as far as the additional risk of icing is concerned, and at the same time the BCD inflator can also be operated in the event of icing as it is attached to the secondary regulator. The advantage of this arrangement is that the valve sides are also clearly assigned to the connections. BCD inflator is on the left and therefore also located on the left hand side from the diver's point of view. So, and now let's move to the DEER configuration of GUE. DEER stands for doing it right. However, as a global and cross-association standard does not yet exist, I would like to emphasize once again that there is no right or wrong. However, I would also like to touch on this briefly at the end. This configuration actually comes from diving with a double tank and shut-off bridge, but it can also be applied to normal diving tank with a double outlet valve. The difference to the configuration described above is that the BCD or the jacket is connected to the main regulator. The connection for the tri-suit is made via the secondary regulator, and the idea behind this is that the BCD can be inflated with the mouth at any time in the event of an icing. At the same time, in the event of an uncontrolled jacket ventilation, the associated right valve can be closed and air can be released with the left hand to prevent an uncontrolled ascent, both at the same time. However, as this goes beyond the equipment-related consideration, I don't want to go into more detail here. I'm much more interested in which configuration you dive with and why. So please let me know in the comment. I am very interested in your solutions and your ideas here. But finally, I would like to mention a few general points that have been neglected so far. In the last example, I briefly went beyond the pure consideration at equipment level. Here, of course, this example is just one of many, and it is intended to illustrate the directions in which some associations are thinking and what else can be taken into account. GUE itself dives through with the latter configuration in demanding environments and in body teams that sometimes don't even speak the same language. The advantage of a standardized equipment configuration is obvious here. Of course, such a standard configuration would make sense and would be welcome, but as there are too many cooks boiling the broth, this will probably remain a dream of the future. But what is important for you now? That depends on the dive. In principle, you should use equipment that works properly, is appropriated for the objective of the dive, and most importantly, you should carry out a proper body check before the dive, so that your body is familiar with your configuration and vice versa. So every one of you can help each other in case of an emergency. Here, and that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I would be very happy to receive a like, a free subscription, or a comment. I wish you all time good air and say ciao, we see us next time, and goodbye.